and welcome to Aegon's Song, for his is the song of ice and fire. In this series, we'll be analysing the scenarios surrounding all of the main point of view characters in their final chapters, either at the end of A Dance with Dragons or in the Winds of Winter sample chapters, looking at where they are, who they're with, and the events that have just happened, and trying to determine how these scenes might play out going forwards. In this episode, we'll be focusing on Sir Barriston's Selmy. In his sample chapter from the Winds of Winter, we find Sir Barriston preparing to lead the charge in the Battle of Slaver's Bay. The trebuchets that surround the city are throwing corpses inside the walls, spreading the pale mare, Selmy believes, forcing him to relinquish a position of strength behind the walls of Marine and meet the Yunkai and Geskari legions out in the open battlefield. Mounted on Daenerys' silver, Sir Barriston gathers his troops at the Western Gate. This includes the Sellsword Company, the Stormcrows, and 5,000 Unsullied, plus what's left of the Dothraki and some pit fighters. Though this does raise the question of where the other 3,000 Unsullied are, as Dany left Astapor with 8,000, but we'll get to that later. The stalwart shields are sent to the East Gate, the Mother's men to the south, and the Free Brothers to the Northern Gate, whilst the Brazen Beasts are left to protect the city, should the war be lost in the field. Sir Barriston gives a few final orders on the chain of command, and one last rousing speech to the troops, which is cut short by the lighting of a fire atop the Great Pyramid, signalling for the charge to begin. As the portcullis rises on the Western Gate, Selmy dons his helm for war. Whilst this is where the official sample chapter ends, from an unpublished reading of an extended version, we know that Sir Barriston begins charging towards the trebuchet named Harridan, only to change course when he sees that it's defended by an entire Geskari legion, heading instead into the slave soldiers known as the Herons, who are situated between the two trebuchets Harridan and the Harpy's daughter. At this point he wonders why the enemy aren't mounting their own charge to prevent the Unsullied from forming up at the gate, then realising it's because they're busy fighting the Ironborn that are landing in the bay. Enthused by this unexpected new ally, "The day is surely ours," he proclaims. So the question is, what happens next? In order to understand that, what we really need to ask is, how does the rest of the battle play out? Selmy seems to believe that the Iron Men joining their cause should give them the edge over the Yunkai and Geskari forces. But clearly, he's not read George's books before. Those who appear to be on top early on usually end up losing. We know that two components of Selmy's plan are to take down the trebuchets and to create enough chaos for the Unsullied to form up. However, we hear in Tyrion's sample chapter that the Unsullied are making for the trebuchet named the Harpy's daughter, and the trebuchets themselves, which are siege weapons, have essentially been nullified by the Queen's men taking the battle to the open field. So it seems that the plans of both sides have already gone awry, and like most battles, we're just left with a free-for-all. Sir Barriston believes the Iron Men have joined to his cause, but we know better. They haven't come to fight in the war, but more on that in the Victorian episode of what happens next. And, as we're reminded repeatedly throughout the books, wars are usually won by the side that has the most men. And even with the Ironborn, and the two sellsword companies, the Windblown and the Second Sons, turning their cloaks, the Yunkai and Geskari still have the greater numbers by far. So it seems likely that the battle will turn against Selmy and his troops soon enough, forcing them into retreat. This brings us back to an earlier point, of where the other 3,000 Unsullied might be. Given that our author often plays with the notion of history repeating itself, then 3,000 Unsullied arriving late to a battle which appears to be all but lost could give us an indication of what might happen next. Jorah tells the story of the 3,000 of Crowhor to Dany in A Storm of Swords, Daenerys 1, when 3,000 Unsullied held the gate against 20,000 Dothraki screamers for 4 days. By the end, over 12,000 Dothraki had been killed, and the rest gave up, cutting off their braids in defeat as they walked past the gate, even though only 600 Unsullied remained. So that's where I'm planting my banner for what happens next, based on the premise of a modern-day version of historical repetition. Another issue that we're forced to address is whether Sir Barriston will survive the battle, and I think the answer, unfortunately, is no. By his own admission, the first into battle are usually the first to fall, and Selmy is leading the charge. Add to that, he's riding Dany's Silver, a pale mare, which, symbolically at least, is a bad omen. And then there's Tyrion's future role to consider. If Sir Barriston should fall in the battle, the Queen will be looking for a new hand upon her return, a job that Tyrion is more than qualified to step into. One last point to note is that of the dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion, who, as I explained in my Daenerys episode, would dominate the battlefield should they decide to involve themselves. Then all that will be left to finish this epic section of our story is for Dany to return, riding Drogon the Black Dread, with 50,000 Dothraki screamers charging beneath her tail.